Hey guys, it's Olive, and today I would like to tell you about some of the books that are coming out in the late summer and early fall of 2015 that I currently have either on pre-order or on my holds list at the library. Some of these have been really talked about recently, but not many of them have, and I'm really excited about all of them. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about them, give you a chance to pre-order, get yourself on the holds list at your library, or just be aware that they're coming out in the very near future. The title of the first book is Everybody Rise, and this is by Stephanie Clifford. This book comes out very, very soon, this upcoming Tuesday, August 18th. This follows a 26-year-old girl in Manhattan, of course, who is trying to socially climb the ranks within Manhattan. She does so partly because she wants to, and partly because she feels pressure from both her mother and her job. This takes place in the years leading up to the 2008 financial crisis, so you can expect to see some big money. My impression is that this book is not just about big money and social status, but also privilege, social climbing in general, class in general, and then also I'm sure it's going to touch on the feelings of being an outsider. I tend to really like books where there is a regular person who tries to make their way into an upper class world. I think this one is going to be incredibly popular. It got a 7-figure advance, so I'm expecting to see big things out of this one. The next book you may have heard of, and it's called Fates and Fury by Lauren Groff. This one comes out on September 15th. Amanda Nelson over at Book Riot has already called this her favorite book of 2015. I really respect and like Amanda Nelson and trust her taste, so I'm looking forward to reading this one. Fates and Furies has been compared to Gone Girl in that it is a study of a marriage, but it seems like it's going to be a whole lot different than Gone Girl. It follows a young couple. They're in their 30s. They have been married for 10 years. Their marriage is much admired and much envied by everyone they know. But of course, things aren't always what they seem. The first half of the book, you follow Lotto, the husband, and in the second half, you're following Matilda, the wife. Apparently, from what I've read, it completely subverts all expectations you have as you're reading the book. Also, I've heard the writing is absolutely beautiful. I think this is definitely one to pay attention to. I think a lot of people are going to be talking about it, and it sounds really interesting, so I'm hoping to get in on the ground floor of that. This next book also comes out on September 15th, and that is called Only the Animals by Ceridwen Dovey. I think this one is already out in the UK, but it's not going to be released in the US until September 15th. This is a book of short stories, but it's unique in that it's told from the viewpoint of animals, and these animals have in some way been killed by some sort of human conflict within the last 100 years. Also, not only does it take place from the point of view of an animal, but in some way each animal pays respects, tribute to an author who wrote about animals in the same time period that that particular animal lived, if that makes sense. This sounds like such an interesting concept. I've read some reviews from people who say that they normally don't read short story collections, which is me. I have a really hard time getting into short stories, but they said even though they're not normally into collections of short stories, they absolutely loved this book. I keep waiting and waiting to finally pick up the short story collection that's going to allow me to get more into short stories, so I'm really hoping it'll be this one. The next 3 books all come out in October. The first one comes out on October 6th, and it is The Tsar of Love and Techno by Anthony Marra. I would read this just for the title alone, even if it didn't sound good. That title. This is technically a short story collection, but really it's one big story broken down into smaller parts. The story takes place in Russia, and it follows several families through several decades. The lives of the families are in some way intertwined, and you're going to be dealing with several different generations, obviously, as you're going through the decades. In terms of the time in which it takes place, it starts during communism. I'm not sure how early into communism, and then it ends in 2013. Of course, I'm interested not only because of the title, which is fabulous, but because it takes place in Russia, and it's really interesting that it's going to start during communism and end close to the present day. and I'm going to be really interested to see how the attitudes of the characters change as time goes on, not only in terms of personal growth, but attitudes towards the government and life in general. I'm supremely interested in Russian culture and Russian history. I've done a lot of research and a lot of reading to those effects, so I will be really interested to see how those ideas and how Russian culture translates to this particular story. Also, if you don't recognize the name Anthony Marra, this is the author of A Constellation of Vital Phenomena, which was released a couple years ago. I've read it. It takes place in Chechnya. Whatever feelings I may have had towards that book, it was definitely historically accurate. I definitely trust Anthony Marra to write a really good book set in Eastern Europe or Russia. I have been highly anticipating this one from the moment that I heard the title, so I'm really hoping it meets my expectations. The next book is one that I recently pre-ordered, and that is called Death Wears a Mask by Ashley Weaver, and this comes out on October 13th. This is the second in the Amory Ames series, which is a murder mystery series, the first of which was Murder at the Brightwell, which I just read last month. Of course, as can be expected, Amory and Milo have found themselves in another very unfortunate situation and need to find a way to work together in order to solve a murder mystery. I loved the first book so much. I have really high hopes for the second one. I love the dynamic between Amory and Milo. Things are going to be different between them in this book, I'm sure, but I think we're gonna see a lot of that same old dynamic from the first book that I loved so much. The next book you probably will have heard of if you're a big fan of David Mitchell. He has a new book coming out on October 27th called Slate House. Of course, being a part of BookTube, I hear a lot about David Mitchell. I've been very interested to read his books. I just haven't gotten around to reading any of his books yet, so this will be my first David Mitchell experience. I'm not sure how it's going to go because this book actually takes place in the same world as the Bone Clocks. I'm sure it will help anyone who decides to read this book to have the context of the Bone Clocks. I'm assuming David Mitchell wrote this specifically for people who have already read it, but I'm going to try it anyway. This book is set in a rundown, probably really creepy house in London. This is a story that spans decades. It starts in 1979 and ends on October 31st, 2015. So I'm sure if you're picking this one up on release date, it would be really awesome if you could be finishing it on the 31st when it officially concludes. Of course, since it concludes on Halloween, you can assume it's going to be a little bit spooky. From what I've been able to tell, it is a blend of speculative fiction, horror, and fantasy. I can't really think of anything that would be more perfect to read at the end of October. I know a lot of people like to read horror and spooky things around Halloween time, and I think this is going to be just perfect for that. The last book comes out on November 10th, and it is called The Big Green Tent by Ludmila Ulitskaya. This is a long one. It's almost 600 pages. This one also takes place in Russia. You guys know by now what I like. This book starts in the 1950s in Moscow when three young boys meet and become friends. Each one of the boys is artistic in some way, and each one of them uses his artistic talent to express dissent toward the Soviet regime. This book follows them as they grow up and enter adulthood, and I'm sure will show not only their personal struggles, but their struggles against the Soviet system, this oppressive system in which they live. I already like books that span several decades, as you can probably tell from this list. That's something I'm very interested in. I like to see a lot of growth from characters. As you know, I love the interestings, where you're starting off meeting them in their adolescence and you're going through their lives and essentially seeing how they're changing over the years. So I'm positive that this book is going to have those kind of aspects that I love, but then there's the added bonus of it's set in Russia, and if it starts in the 1950s and it's going from there, I know from a historical standpoint the time periods that these young boys are going to be living through, and I think it's going to make a really amazing story. I've been meaning to read more Russian literature, and this has the added bonus of being a modern piece of Russian literature. I've heard amazing things about this book, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. So those are 7 books to watch out for over the coming months. I'm very excited about all of these. I would love to hear if you're excited about any of them. I'd be very interested to hear if this video has inspired anyone to put one of these books on their TBR or pre-order or put on your holds list. I think they're all going to make some waves in, of course, very different ways. I think the end of 2015 is going to be a fantastic time for books. There are a lot of amazing books coming out, certainly not limited to the list I just gave you. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can leave me a comment down below. You can find me on both Twitter and Instagram at @abookolive. And as always, the link to my Goodreads is down below if you would like to be friends. Have a good day, happy reading. I will see you next time. Bye. Thea, could you fucking not? She's scratching at her box. Stop it. Stop it. Only the animals.